I believe in the power of the narrative, and I didn't just arrive at this. I started my research around youth and gang violence on social media because I was driven by media questions that can be completely problematic. I was driven by questions that suggest that there is a tremendous amount of violence that happens online that influences actual rates of violence in Black and brown communities across the country. And so I decided to investigate that question. But once I did, I was quickly checked by the youth and individuals that I was connected with. In part because once I started to actually listen and hear their stories, I began to realize that there's a huge amount of power that is a part of the ability for one to curate their identities and be able to tell their stories online. And a part of that narrative for many people is the everyday experience of trauma and grief and violence that happens in one's community. And I began to realize that if I can use these research chops, these skills in order to help to propel those stories so that people could really understand that Black and brown youth and individuals are complex and are multifaceted, multidimensional, and that the experiences that you see are not just one thing, that perhaps I can help them tell those stories. So that's my model of social change.
I'm going to be bold and try to follow that. My model for social change is memory and imagination. My model for social change is based in understanding the power of language. When I used to get my hustle game together in junior high school and write just flawless notes for people to be able to leave school early. And realizing that there was power in something about my voice, my writing, the skills of understanding how people need to be spoken to. Maybe not for the best outcomes, but it was real. It was like I was like, oh, there's power in this, and not just that, but I'm one of the few holders of that particular skill in my community. And what does that mean, right? And then thinking about like that connects to me to like the next iteration of my community organizing, which was like back in my early 20s, like making resumes for my weed dealers. So they can because they can get jobs, so they don't have to worry about the technical, the stuff that happens when you're unemployed but have money. So my social justice looks a little different. So maybe a little broken. It's not really based in the academic realm. It's not really based in realms of I think what we can strategically do, though it has evolved into that. It has become strategic and visionary, right? And that's where the imagination comes from. It's remembering that I come from a Black city in an era where Black culture, Black music, Black fashion, Black everything was literally shaping the world. And then imagining collectively with people what our new world could look like, what the next world could look like, holding up those same things that build me. It's remembering what it is to wait for buses that don't come. It's remembering what it is to move time after time, and then envision with folks within the communities I now work, how can we prevent that? How can we organize around that? So my social justice pedagogy, I guess, if it even counts as one, right, is really like seated in concrete and just like what it means to move through the world and how I can support the world around me moving through the world in the ways that they dream of doing. Yeah.
So that's incredible, by the way. I think it's great to be on a panel like this because it gives us a little bit of a perspective on how different individuals and researchers and activists think about the same issues, which is a strength to addressing that issue. And so I think of social justice as calling attention to raising awareness about and challenging inequalities that exist in the system that have advantages and disadvantages for individuals or certain groups of people. And in my work, I try to look at how a lot of the work basically ignores the role of important identities, including religion, which is very important to a lot of people. And in academics, especially, the role of religion is quite absent for various reasons. So when I think about all of those various angles, raising awareness, challenging inequalities, calling attention to some of these identities that we've ignored, I try to address that in the work that I do.
For me, I always pay homage to my elders and my ancestors, so I don't say that I have my own pedagogy, my own philosophy. This is borrowed. This is following a Black radical tradition that existed since the first African set foot on, this soil, right? That we've been struggling, that we've been disobeying. We have been basically disobeying the rules since, the first enslaved African overslept for work, right? We've been disobeying since then. So I think about that, and I also give homage again to my elders and my ancestors for my pedagogy, which is, think about Ella Baker, strong people don't need strong leaders, right? That we are the leaders that we've been looking for. So when I think back to what the type of organizing I do, it's more participatory, right? So it's a more participatory politics and a more participatory culture, so that it's not focused on a one charismatic male leadership, but more group-centered leadership. So how do we envision, how do we empower everyone to be involved in their own liberation? Because the only way that we truly get liberated. Liberation will not be something that's trickled down. It's going to be something from the bottom up. When everyone has access to the same tools and the resources and the same power that everyone else has. So that's one of the main things. But in regards to social media, is that we have the ability now to not just only challenge or name and challenge the systems of oppression, but it gives us the opportunity now to envision the world that we want to create. So social media, with the emergence of hashtags, gives us the space now to communicate with one another, to envision a new, brand new world.
Wow, this has all been great. I sort of feel like the junior. I think everyone has so much more experience, and I'm looking forward to hearing everything else you have to say to learn. I'm, trying to be a historian. I'm a nerd, and I think, when I was an undergrad and I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I started getting involved in anti-war work, back in my hometown in Mansfield, Ohio, anti-war work, anti-poverty work, anti-racist work, and I didn't know what to do. I would just go to the library, or I'd go to the bookstore, and I just wondered, well, how did the folks in the 60s, do things, right? I mean, so it's building on the prior point, I began to read books of, in speeches like people like King, but reading books about Ella Baker. One of my heroes, I just sort of have Bob Moses is someone who I really admire, the type of organizer where it was about, going in, being amongst a particular population and trying to get folks to move on a particular issue. Or, one of my biggest, one of the folks that I really admire is Howard Zinn, the historian. That's how I really got into history. Part of it is, we want to tell histories about folks who have struggled and sometimes won, right? Because if you're talking about, if you're looking at, all the, terrible things that are going on around us, we're trying to look for a way out. And sometimes it's not about thinking about who won such and such election, right? It's not about thinking about, who might have won this war, right? It was about who are the regular people who decided to stand up and organize for something, right? Or sit down for something else, right? And that's what inspired me, coming up in the Bush era, where, it was a terror alert every day, we're being terrorized on TV, it's we don't know when the next time we're going to get bombed, even though we know why, we know what's going on, in terms of what the administration at that time was, doing in terms of trying to perpetuate their own narrative about how we need to be obedient. And the narratives that I was reading, the histories that I was, consulting was about disobedience. So, as someone who wants to teach, younger folks, whether it's undergrads, whether it's organizers or activists, I begin to think about how do I make what I've learned extremely relevant and trying to find ways to meet people where they are. Like, I mean, one example is I spent most of the day yesterday talking about Beyonce's Formation. Yeah, like I know, literally all day, like both of my classes, like in the office, and we're like theorizing, like, okay, like, how is this political? Which ways is it political? What can we do to like how can we use this imagery when it comes to generating more awareness about racial justice issues, right? I mean, like, so it's I think that's one of the benefits of being able to look at the grassroots, but then also incorporating popular culture, hip hop culture, like things that I grew up enjoying as well. So yeah, like it's history, pop culture, trying to think of the ways in which people who were always struggling against the odds, like sometimes how do they overcome the odds?
I am so glad that you brought that up. I want to thank all the panelists for their contribution so far. We're going to do a bridge question, but Austin pretty much already gave it away. So from the perspective that you just articulated, we talk about Beyonce and formation.
I feel you, and I appreciate that, and I'm going to be really fair about the amount of time we take up. Here's the thing, when I woke up today, I'm wearing a turtle monocle, and I really love this piece. And I said to myself, self, you're about to go to your alma mater and give a talk. Is today the day for a gold chain? And then Beyonce. And I was like, this is my hot sauce in my bag. No, basically what it comes down to, no, I'm serious. I'm like really, I appreciate this because I think that the thing, and I actually have not read 99.9% of the think pieces that have come out, the numerology pieces. Well, Beyonce is 3 minutes in, and then she did the twirl 3 times, and then Blue was there with 3 people behind. I don't know about that. But what I do know for sure is that it's the blackest Black History Month ever. And anytime I get to go anywhere and drape myself in costume gold and a little bit of real gold, I feel great. And I feel like something is happening that's dope because what she actually did this morning was build a bridge for me between 2 worlds that I thoroughly inhabit, which is the world of being able to come and have a conversation about the theory and the politic behind the work that we're doing. Also just being super fucking Black and just unapologetic about it and just whatever that means. So thank you, Beyonce, and I thank you for your hot sauce, and I'm wearing my version today.
Shari has taught me how to be brave in space like this. I'm going to be brave for Shari. I hear you. First of all, don't nobody say nothing bad about Beyonce. Activate the beehive in any moment, just in case. But I think, how Beyonce's formation has connected for me in the research that I do is that, Beyonce is able to be herself. She has grown into a space where she's able to be her full self in all of her Blackness and able to communicate that in any way that she wants to do it. But for the youth that I work with, they do not have that capacity whatsoever. The words that they use, the images that they put on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, the ways in which they communicate are hyper-policed, are interpreted in ways that do not represent the fullness of themselves. And so, thinking about this, there's a lot of privilege in Beyonce's ability to be able to communicate that I, respect, but also realize that that's not true for many of the people and communities that we are working in and that we want to represent as well.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump in. I think that's a very great point that you've made. I think it's important to understand the privilege that she has and the platform that she's able to communicate her ideas and her thoughts through. And that privilege, not a lot of individuals have at this point. So I think that this question is not only about Beyonce, it's also about the representation of different minority groups at that level, at that platform. And what we know is that there aren't that many individuals in the first place, which is why somebody like Beyonce gets a lot of criticism, but also gets a lot of praise. And if we had more individuals in her position from these various groups, maybe we wouldn't react in the same way just to her. It would be more varied in our response.
Yeah, I think, so some of the snippets of the conversations I was having with students and colleagues, I mean, for us, like, the issue really comes, I don't say really comes down to, but one of the main issues, right, is, what is the role of art in social movements? What's the role of protest? Because I think for many of us who are for some of us on the ground, sometimes we neglect the importance of culture and building culture and the role that culture has in building communities, and sustaining people. I mean, I remember when I was, there was a point, I think it was last year, in the midst of the national mobilization of Ferguson, some of us went and participated, and we're at the police station. It's a very tense situation where you had hundreds of protesters just sitting down in front of the police station, and folks, we don't know what's going to happen, right? I mean, it's okay, there's, we're engaged in a standoff here, and then folks began chanting, and then towards the end though, there was some as folks were filing out, there was a bunch of younger folks who began chanting, I can't remember, I think it was a Lil Jon song, Turn Up For What or something, that's how old I am, I know, I vaguely know the hook, it's very familiar to me, and then but, yeah, I came up in the 90s, I'm this ain't Nas, so I'm thinking yeah, these, so the activists began chanting this hook, right, as what would follow when, Kendrick Lamar released All Right, right? I mean, folks are turning these songs into chants, and there were some other activists who just looked perplexed, what are these kids doing? They're just immature and this and another. But it's no, you have this group of individuals who have been through the, to quote Kanye, through the wire, for the last month, 2 months, and it's this was their moment for healing, right? They turned that street, what I called at the time, they turned that street into their own church, and that song became their sermon, right? And it's something that some of us activists, really didn't understand. You don't really understand it until you see it, right? So I think when you think about Beyonce and what she did when she released the video, and then she went on that, just rocked the halftime show, right? I mean, it's you have folks who are somewhat critical, is this really political? Well, maybe not objectively, but people politicize it, and it's occurring within a particular political context to where it becomes a source for, affirmation. It becomes a rallying point. Formation really, makes for a great slogan, which is really still important in social movements. And she's also recalling the history with her halftime performance. I mean, she really recalled John Carlos, I think it's Tommy or Timmy, someone should Tommy Smith, right, in the Black Power Fest in Mexico City, right? This hidden transcript that people they're communicating to black folks, right? Beyonce and her team, they're communicating to black folks in a way, but white folks sort of know about it, and they know enough about it to be pissed off, right? Yeah, exactly. And it's that moment, to me, sort of recalls the 68 moment because of the platform and the amount of people that she was able to reach. And, they did a tribute to Mario Woods, which wasn't televised, obviously, but just dressing in the Panthers garb was enough for people to either feel affirmed or to, be offended. And then, and of course, I would, footnote that obviously the Panthers aren't the, greatest organization, shouldn't be romanticized, but it's still very important to export that imagery in 2016 at the Super Bowl.
a lot of great things have been said. I definitely want to touch upon what you just mentioned about how maybe Beyonce's Super Bowl performance was a political act, maybe inadvertent, right? Because as you mentioned, this was like the Black History Month. So black, right? Bliggly black, right? So when I think about that, I think about how the hashtag on Twitter, right? How we had these conversations about maybe all Black history, whether it's SNCC, the Black Panther Party, whatnot, these conversations that was going on. And it wasn't until that Super Bowl performance where everybody now was talking about the Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party is like trending now on Twitter. There's think pieces coming out right now about the Black Panther Party. People are arguing about the history of the Black Panther Party. Everyone now is like digging to see or learn more about the Black Panther Party. And the most interesting thing for me too is it created this dialogue, right? I was able to, poll people on social media, right? I'll poll people now. How many here have learned about the Black Panther Party in elementary school? How many have learned about the Black Panther Party in high school, as in your high school textbooks taught you about the Black Panther Party? See, I'm not saying like it was taught at home. In school. Oh, so all the hands went down now? Everyone said, I learned it in kindergarten. And that's what happened on social media, right? That a lot of people realized that they did not learn about the Black Panther Party. Some of them not even until they was in college. Or most people had to learn about it on their own. And even still, some people was like, I didn't even know about it until the Super Bowl, right? So it created this conversation where people were, okay, they could look into the radical history of the Black Panther Party so that they can see that they're just not black men in leather jackets standing with guns in front of the courthouse, but there were black men and women that was having breakfast programs. They had, the sickle cell programs and busing families to the prison so they can see their families, and have over 50 social programs that people just do not know about. And I think that inadvertently, Beyonce opened up this dialogue for all of us.
I love these responses. I want to add one of my own as a bridge to the last question about your philosophy of information technology or social media, and that is the concept that Mo really brought this to me, of joy, right? Not so much, well, let's call it what it is. It's ratchet, right? As ratchet as Beyonce could be with Big Frida in her video, right? But is there a space for joy and the banal in your philosophies of social media? Right? Can you be, as a student, as the young people did at Ferguson, and I remember reading news reports, the news reporters were stunned that they would listen to music and dance and smoke blunts at a protest. I'm like, why wouldn't they? This is part of their everyday, right? And so is there a space for joy? Does everything that you want for social justice and online media have to be about oppression or resistance? Right? So that's something to think about. But I do want to quiz you. Like, what do you think digital media, social media, online existence should do or should be for people who are fighting against some form of oppression, right? For social justice, or just for the right to be recognized as a human being? I can rephrase that if you want.
No, I was just trying to avoid going in the actual order that we're now always going in. For them. It's not for us.
I can at least address the question about joy. Obviously, yes. And thinking historically, mass meetings during the civil rights movement, right? Like, oftentimes would occur in the church, in the black church, and it wasn't just preaching, right? I mean, there was a soundtrack. Whether you were listening to folks singing in the church, or whether it's James Brown, or whether it's Marvin Gaye, right? Like, there was always a soundtrack, and there was always space for celebration. And, so it's hard for me to imagine having or participating in a social movement or community organizing, especially around the issue of Black death without without folks being able to take the time to really be able to take care of themselves without being able to take the time to enjoy whatever you happen to enjoy, and even if it's Beyonce dropping a video on a random Saturday, right? It's like we're like folks, like this is serious work, but if you want to be serious all the time, you'll end up your life might not last as long as you want it to last, and I think we have to always be aware that yes, there's room for you to actually be fully human, and part of being full humanity includes all the emotions, all the feelings that everyone should be able to feel without being oppressed.
Let me push you on that just a bit. Is that possible with social media?
Is it possible with social media? Absolutely. If you think about, I'm sure that there are folks who are a part of whatever movement they're a part of, and they're part of the Bay Hive, or they're part of the Future Hive, or they're part of all these other, all these other affinity groups, right, that occur on social media. Now, whether or not being a part of some sort of affinity group that is connected to pop culture should translate to political activism is another question. I think there are moments where it can. Dr. Neal talked about the Harry Potter group that responded, to the Trayvon Martin killing. So there are opportunities for that. I guess the question then for me, the question would become strategic. Do we need to mobilize this group of people? And if we do, then let's do it.
Sorry, are you talking about the joyful, specific? I was asking, I think, because I think there is this, and I think you just described it a little bit, this divide that we ask folks to engage in their lives, in our lives, that is like the serious circle, and then the play circle over here, and never the twain shall meet. And I think that's part of why this Beyonce question is relevant, not just because she just dropped a video, but because it is a moment of crossing those perceived boundaries. And I think that speaks to, of course, there's room for joy. Joy is such a critical part of resistance. The joy is part of the reason. I live in Detroit, and I've lived in Detroit for a few years. I'm not a native Detroiter. But moving into Detroit, doing organizing work in Detroit with the Allied Media Conference and with grassroots organizers all over the city, the urgency is high. The level of seriousness is high. The amount of things that are happening that are directly, physical attacks on the Black bodies and citizens of Detroit is happening right now. But I have never laughed so much, and I have never built so much, and I have never connected with so many families and individuals. And I think that the same thing is true on social media. The urgency is high. We need to be talking about these losses, these deaths, these acts, this violence against humanity, because otherwise it's literally just not going to show up on the national spectrum of media and communication. But I've also never laughed so hard. Black Twitter is my favorite place to be. I spent my entire weekend with Black Twitter after Beyonce, because it's hilarious. People are so funny and witty and smart, and Kim's keynote. Did y'all see Kim's? Part of the thing that I thought was brilliant about it was that throughout it, she was inserting these little phrases and words that were coming straight out of social media that were making it a pleasurable experience for us to be a part of in real life. So not only is there joy, and it is a core part of how we gather, it is a part of, to me, one of the dopest parts about being Black and being, actually just literally that, is that we have the capacity, like I said, but we have the capacity to find joy and to actually be so full of it that it becomes something that people see profit coming out of. They're able to literally sell it to each other because we are just effervescent in our humor, in our reactions, in the way that we frame things, the way we understand things, the way we play people, the way we drag people. It is the best. It's the most creative writing. It is the most Vines. Who was making these 6-second movies of foolishness? I love it. But I also think that it's really telling of why, for example, My grandmother could come out of the Depression era and say, you know, we weren't killing ourselves like the white men across the way were, because we already knew poverty. We already knew certain types of oppression. We already knew what it was like to have to do without. And so what we chose was survival and joy, which sometimes came from church, sometimes came from other places, but it's always there. So it's not even an option to me. It's in all of our blood.
Du Bois wrote that there's nothing more joyful than the Negro on Saturday, right? The day when he doesn't have to do any work. And so is that somehow tied the ways in which you frame the idea of labor's resistance? Is there some element of joy tied into that as well? Can that fit into your social justice framework? I mean, to your technology framework?
Yeah, I definitely believe so. I also want to talk about what Kim had mentioned in her, I think either her keynote or the workshop, when she said that we're not a fraction, we don't come, fractional parts, we're layers. And I thought that was like really, really important, that we're just not either or, right? Especially on social media. It's just not, Zellie Imani, social media activists, like we play games, we have, Twitter discussions that are lighthearted, and we drag people all the time, and the clapbacks are like legendary, right? And a lot of times when we think about social media, we just think about the hashtags that are used as digital obituaries, right? That we think about, the hashtag Sandra Bland, the hashtag Mike Brown, hashtag Trayvon Martin. But we also have, the hashtags growing up black, all right? Hashtag, what is it, like Thanksgiving with black families? Yeah. Thanksgiving clapback, right? Or do you guys remember when the news had this coverage where it was like breaking news where the two llamas escaped from the zoo? It was like a black llama and like a white llama, and everybody was cheering for the black llama to escape. And then when the police apprehended it, they even wrote it on the bottom like black suspect or apprehended. We was like, what? Like, there's a llama. How you gonna apprehend a llama? Like, and everyone was like, oh, he got apprehended. Damn, man, see, it's always the black llama. The white llama got free. So we have all these moments, but we do have moments to laugh and have this joy and pleasure. And I think that is where we find a way to sustain ourselves and sustain our mental health as well, because we can't always be so knee-deep into grief all the time, so knee-deep into Black death that's always perpetually being retweeted on our timeline. Every single day is another video, every single day is another name that we have to remember, and it gets traumatizing, and we need those type of spaces to, have some type of joy.
So just to jump in, I think, I wholeheartedly believe that there is so much joy that can happen on social media, but my concern is around the visibility of that joy and who gets to decode that coded language. And so when we're able to engage in these interactions online and how we all conceptualize joy and fun is one thing, but then there are other actors, societal actors, surveillance teams that get to make decisions around whether or not your example of joy is actually an example of crime or violence or harm or threat. And so I worry about the extent to which that joy is sustainable and highly visible on highly visible platforms. Again, that's just my only kind of like gut thing, but I certainly believe that joy is possible.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. That's the way that I would think about it, that there's unfortunately not one resolution. It depends on the audience that you want to reach out to. And as important as it is to have positive reinforcement and news for the community that's suffering, it's sadly the case that negative news is what grabs the attention of the majority group. In fact, there was a lecture right here yesterday by Stuart Soroka who was talking about the importance of bad news for good democracy. And that lecture was basically talking about how it takes bad news to get the majority group to attend to any sort of problems with the system, the status quo as it is. And so I think it's important to think about, well, how is a particular news medium or any kind of media, how is the way that it's being represented working for different kinds of audiences at the same time? Because there may be important differences.
that in mind, am I supposed to open up to questions or should I shut it down?
Yep.
Let's open up for questions. I want to thank all my panelists because y'all have been really awesome, especially given the haphazard way in which I moderated this panel. But if anybody in the audience has questions, you gonna come
I
with us?
do. I have a comment, and I'll make it very quick, and it's just to extend the conversation that I love about the role of joy in social media and hashtags. I just have to say that not only is social media and hashtag kind of implementing themselves in a very radical kind of way as it relates to social movements, but they're also clapping back against systemic and institutional racism. And I think my favorite one to address that is Stay Mad Abby, right? And Abby was the white girl who wanted to sue the University of Texas because she didn't get admitted because of her requirements. She thought that it was because she wasn't black, and it was incredible about how black folks came out and said, you know, stay mad at me because here are my credentials, right? And show that. But I think to Desmond's point in terms of like who gets to decode like the hashtag that we created for joy, the one that comes to mind is the one that I use for joy all the time that I love. It's called Black Girl Magic, right? And with Black Girl Magic, there was an article that was written in the Huffington Post that says, wait a minute, black girls aren't magical. Like, how can they be? Like, how can black women be magic? Like, the stress that puts, you know, on black women to, you know, to be magical, to think that they can just wand away all of their problems. It's kind of like, hold up. Like, this hashtag wasn't for you. Like, what are you talking about? Like, black girl magic is like when brothers give each other the head nod, right? Or the dap that brothers get. Black girl magic is for other women to affirm our sisterhood. Like, girl, I see you. Keep doing that. That's a good job. But people try to dissect that and literally took the word magic, right? As like, what do you mean? Black women are magical. Well, yeah, we are, but that's enough.
I wish I could have captured your face. Just mean that right on out, because that's, yeah, I co-sign.
One more? You gotta speak loud from up there.
I just want to know, I just recently saw Chirac yesterday.
I'll pass on that. Because we'll be here for another hour talking about exactly what Spike Lee was trying to do with Chirac. But that's a good question. I ain't touching that one. Yes, ma'am?
I wanted to ask a question about like acting as an ally on social media and on other platforms, and like the balance between putting your own voice or ideas into the conversation while still respecting that you're in a different space.
So I'll try to rephrase your question, not rephrase, repeat. What is it asking? She wanted to ask about being an ally on social media, joining in the conversation?
Yeah.
Yes, as an ally without trying to hijack. Yes. Is it possible?
It's incredibly difficult, I'll say that. The reason being because there's a difference in what is intended by the person creating the message and how it's being perceived by the audience. And sadly, it's being moderated by the race of the person saying the message. So it's a very difficult thing to answer. But I will say that it can be done and has been done successfully. And maybe this is another area where negative news and negative information is powerful, because oftentimes allyships and allyhood is created by other communities suddenly recognizing that there is some sort of injustice that pertains to a particular group of people, even if it's not them, and then calling attention and awareness to that so that you can do something about it. But to what extent is it successful from both the audience and the creator's side? I can't answer that in a sentence, unfortunately, but maybe others can.
If I could, I would talk about something from my days as a rhetorician and the concept of kairos, the right time for the right sentiment. And I think for many allies, they worry about when's the right time to speak up, not realizing that some of their most important contributions are to be there and listen and acknowledge that things are being said. Right? So it's not, you don't always have to jump in, but if you show that you're there and you're listening, I think that carries as much weight than if you try to be witty and a hashtag back and forth. You don't necessarily have to do that. Just show that you're there and you're interested, if that makes any sense. I got 4 minutes.
Can I just give a 10 second answer to that too? Sorry, it's not a really long one. Okay, it's that you should also talk to your folks. Allyship is not about allies inserting themselves into other communities and being like, I'm here, put me to work. Even that's great, that's awesome, we need that too. But allyship is really about when nobody else is watching. You are still standing for the things that you have declared allegiance to. And so whether or not you get to join in on the things that are happening in silos within social media spaces like Twitter or Facebook or whatever is actually not the point. The point is, what are you saying to your folks? How are you talking to your folks who are embodying their own forms and functions of anti-black racism or sexism or other problematic oppressive, ideas. That's the charge of allies, is to have the hardest conversations with the people who you're friends with who may not actually hold that same politic that you do.
I saw some half raised to their shoulder hands. Does anybody want to put their hand all the way up? Oh, Amber says, forget that, y'all done.